John, in really wanting to know whether God exists, I have focused on arguments. I was trained in science, so I like arguments. And what I like shouldn't make any difference, certainly to exploring whether God exists. You tell me something pretty radically different. You say that all these arguments are not only won't get me anywhere, but they're actually unhelpful. I think that's a word you used, unhelpful. Why?
I think if you're interested in getting someone to share your worldview, your religious outlook, presenting them with some abstract arguments is unlikely to do the job. It's unlikely to cut much ice. I think the arguments are welcome enough, but only for those who are already convinced. It's interesting that philosophers who are already committed believers spend a lot of time on these arguments and debate them a great deal. But it's largely within a philosophical ghetto. Those who are outside that world have maybe looked at them briefly and dismissed them. And it's not that if they looked at them more carefully, they'd sign up and become theists. I mean, philosophers never... although, of course, argument, clarity, rational, logical clarity is paramount in philosophy. In fact, it gets people to change their mind much less frequently than we think. I've never been in a seminar where the speaker, in response to an argument in a question, has said, "Oh, that's a good point, I'll have to change my view." They always say, "Oh, I'll have to think about that," wow. Meaning, I'm sure I'm clever enough to think of a response given a few more minutes or a few more days. Arguments can easily become a game which are batted back and forth. What I think generates the power of a religious worldview is how it resonates with the subject on all sorts of levels, intellectual, emotional, and practical. And all those other dimensions have to somehow cohere.
What do you believe are the consequences of arguments about God or for God? Some would use probabilistic kinds of arguments, arguing to inferring to the best explanation, not a deductive proof, but trying to infer what would be the best explanation. Others would say that God is a basic belief, and you should start with God, and you don't even have to worry about being attacked. So there are a lot of different analytical approaches to God. How do you weigh them in terms of their relative importance beyond the philosophy seminar?
I'm not convinced by the probabilistic arguments, certainly. I've never found that scientists I've talked to, or very seldom found, that they feel these are explanatory hypotheses which do any real scientific work. Scientists look for detailed explanations in terms of mechanisms or mathematical models, or something that really generates some predictions and some explanations of how things precisely occurred the way they did. Invoking a grand designer, it just doesn't seem to tick any of the right scientific boxes. It's not to say these arguments are worthless, but I think they're unlikely to convince any scientist.